drones from the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, and Special Operations Forces struck the Feodosia Marine Oil Terminal. At least 5 storage tanks were hit, according to Freedom sources in the Security Service of Ukraine. As a result of the attack, a large fire broke out at the oil depot. A substation in Feodosia was also hit, with transformers and dispatcher protective automation systems damaged. A series of explosions also rocked the Simferopol substation. In addition, a strike was carried out on Hvardiivsk, from where the Russian army launches Shahid drones at Ukraine. It is known that warehouses with Russian drones are also located there.
Indeed, it was loud in Crimea today. Today, the Feodosia landscapes. They pretty much decorate, the entire eastern part of Crimea. They say the flames can be seen from 30, and in some places even 50 kilometers away. As they say, everything is burning down to the ground. The base needs to be shut down. This is a recommendation for the occupying Crimean authorities, who have also confirmed there will be no gasoline.
Meanwhile, on the front line, the Russian army continues its attempts to advance in the Donetsk region. In the Lyman direction, Russian occupiers suffered losses in both equipment and personnel as a result of the nighttime operations by the pilots of the Signum Battalion. Their strike drones destroyed several trucks, including a Kamaz and the Ural, as well as a UAZ minivan, which is popularly known among Russians as the Loaf. And in the southern Slobozansky direction, aerial reconnaissance operators from the Strix unit of the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine struck the positions of the Russian army. Using FPV drones, they destroyed 2 communication antennas, 2 field ammunition depots, and a Russian drone. In addition, enemy infantry was hit. There, in the southern Slobozansky direction, the defense forces repelled attempts by Russian invaders to break through the defenses near Vovchansk, Kamenka, and Kakhovka. The enemy also tried to advance toward Balagovka and Virchanskoye. In the Konstantinivka direction, Ukrainian defenders thwarted attempts by the Russian army to attack in the areas of Pretikino, Alexander Shultin, Shurbanivka, Berstok, Ruzinivyar, and Poltavka. On the Pokrovsk section of the front, the enemy attempted assaults in the areas of Vladimirovka, Rodinsk, Myrnorad, Kotlin, Udakny, Pokrovsk, Zvariv, and Novopoplivka.
And despite this, the leadership of the defense forces managed, in some directions, to form tactical level reserves and carry out, implement active defense, meaning to launch counterattacks. I'm referring to Dobropilia. There was a well-known raid by Russian forces. They were split up into, 3 segments, 3 regions.
In the Kupiansk direction, operators from the Sapsan Battalion of Unmanned Systems, part of the 14th Separate Mechanized Brigade, used FPV drones to destroy a loaf van and a quad bike belonging to the Russian occupiers. However, the enemy's logistics problems didn't end there. The invaders were left without communications, as Ukrainian drones detected and destroyed several of their antennas at once. Meanwhile, units from the 24th Separate Assault Battalion Adar, together with fighters from the 33rd Separate Assault Regiment, liberated several settlements in the Zaporizhia region at once. As a result of the successful operation, the defense forces of Ukraine regained control over Shurbeki, Melyi Shurbeki, and part of Stepin. The Ukrainian flag is once again flying over them. Several Russian occupiers were also taken prisoner. At the same time, the units added that the operation is still ongoing.
There were 190 combat clashes on the front lines just in the past 24 hours. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The Russian army carried out 108 airstrikes and more than 4,000 shellings, trying to break through in several directions. Ukrainian defense forces repelled 6 Russian attacks in the North Slobozansky and Kursk directions, 14 in the Lyman direction, and 15 in the South Slobozansky direction. In the Konstantinivka area, the Russians attacked Ukrainian positions 21 times, and in the Oleksandrivka area, 28 times. The highest number was in the Pokrovsk area, with 65 attacks. And just in the past day alone, Ukrainian defense forces eliminated 1,200 Russian servicemen. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the total losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale aggression had exceeded 1,125,000 soldiers. In addition, over the past day, 5 Russian tanks, 29 artillery systems, and 145 units of enemy vehicles and special equipment were destroyed. We are discussing the situation at the front with a military expert. Vladislav Seleznev is already joining the Freedom broadcast. Vladislav, good afternoon. Glory to Ukraine.
Good afternoon to you as well. Glory to the heroes.
Vladislav, as usual, the hottest directions remain the same. Nothing is changing. We just shared some information from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine that the Russians are trying to break through actively in several directions, but the Armed Forces of Ukraine are pushing them back. Please tell us, in which directions is this happening, and what is the situation across all sections of the front?
Traditionally, the situation remains extremely dynamic across all sections of the front. There is a huge number of combat clashes, and in general, 1,200 Russian servicemen killed and wounded is a clear indicator that the enemy is literally trying to attack along the entire front line. In some areas, the dynamics are higher, while in others there is a certain stagnation, but it's impossible to speak of complete calm even in relatively quiet sections of the front. The enemy is attacking everywhere, trying to find weak spots in our defense. Traditionally, Pokrovsk and Myrnograd, the highest number of combat clashes in a day, falls on this section of the front. Recently, the enemy has significantly intensified its actions on the Dobrapilya salient. This is not by chance. The enemy is trying to preserve what remains in the operational encirclement from the forces and assets of the 5th Combined Arms Army that advanced toward Dobrapilya. Fierce battles and clashes are ongoing. Ukrainian defense forces are conducting search and raid operations, trying to destroy the enemy. In turn, the enemy is trying to reinforce its lines and positions with additional forces and resources. After all, as is known, the enemy has recently redeployed its elite units and formations to Donbas. I mean Russian paratroopers and Russian Marines. Yes, absolutely, the situation remains extremely dynamic. But while we always focus on one or two of the most significant sections of the front, where the largest number of clashes occur, I wouldn't overlook other sections of the front, which, in my opinion, have the potential for rather critical developments there. I'm referring to the situation in the Kupiansk area. There, the enemy is still trying to infiltrate into the center of this settlement, advancing literally toward the central districts of Kupiansk. And the actions of the Russians in the south of the Zaporizhia region. For a long time, my colleagues and I have been saying that, eventually, the enemy would bring its forces and resources into quite serious motion on this section of the front, in fact. Right now, we are witnessing this. Just a couple of days ago, I had the chance to talk to a serviceman who is directly involved in the combat work of our artillery in the south of the Zaporizhia region. He literally told me that over the past 3 weeks, the number of shells fired at the enemy has been many times greater than during similar operations before. Accordingly, the enemy is also trying to use firepower against our defenders. And, in fact, this trend in the use of artillery reflects the enemy's attempts to advance, including in the south of the Zaporizhia region. We keep hearing about Stepnohursk and the fighting to the south of it. We're also hearing about fighting in the direction of Orikhiv and, accordingly, the counteractions of the Ukrainian army, which led to the liberation of Mala Tokmachka. We're hearing about fighting in the direction of and a number of other settlements in the southeast of the Zaporizhia region, for example, in the area of Yeliapol. The enemy, yes, is definitely trying to use their numerical advantage, attacking at different sections of the front and looking for weak spots in our defenses. The situation remains dynamic, and it's quite possible to say that the enemy is in a hurry, probably counting on the next week or two while the ground is still relatively stable. Our dirt roads, as a result of the autumn rains, have already turned into a complete quagmire, so that's likely a factor. Nevertheless, the fact remains that the enemy still has the resources to carry out large-scale offensive actions on different sections of the front. For their part, the Ukrainian army is demonstrating resilience. I think this resilience is due not only to the courage and heroism of our soldiers, but also to the very same engineering fortifications that were built in time at the most threatened sections of the front.
Yes, and it's also worth noting that there are still some difficulties, if you can call them that, for the Russian army. Of course, our drone-related sanctions, this is something I also want to talk about, in the context of General Valyak in France. Yes, SBU and SSO drones struck the Feodosia Marine Oil Terminal again on the night of October 13th, hitting at least 5 storage tanks. This was reported by Freedom sources in the Security Service of Ukraine. As a result of the attack, a massive fire broke out at the oil depot. The Feodosia substation was also hit, with transformers and the dispatcher's protective automation system damaged. A series of explosions also occurred at the Simferopol substation. In addition, a strike was carried out on Hvardeysk, from where the Russian army launches Shahids at Ukraine. It is known that there are also warehouses with Russian drones located there. Could you please tell us, strategically speaking, how such strikes are already affecting and will continue to affect things in the future? For example, the supply of Russian Federation troops, or perhaps even their morale.
Historically, it just so happens that I have my own sources in Crimea. I'm a Crimean myself. Accordingly, the sites or facilities that have come under the influence of those good, unknown drones and missiles are, in fact, just part of the large-scale and multi-layered activities of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. It's a kind of death by 1,000 cuts tactic against the Russian occupiers in Crimea. Basically, this work has been ongoing, continues now, and I believe it will keep being carried out by the Ukrainian Defense Forces. Pay attention to what is under particularly close scrutiny from the Ukrainian Defense Forces. Military sites, the occupiers' military infrastructure, and fuel and energy industry facilities. Now, we've started targeting energy sector facilities as well. 2 electrical substations in the area of Feodosia and near Simferopol. These are extremely important facilities for ensuring the energy resilience of the temporarily occupied Crimean Peninsula. I'll say more. Just the other day, I heard from my sources that the enemy will continue to carry out engineering and technical measures to strengthen the resilience and survivability of the Balaklava thermal power plant, which supplies electricity to military facilities in the currently occupied territory of Sevastopol. The enemy is preparing and taking certain measures, like those who are building bunkers for their aircraft at the Saki 4 airfield, which is near the village of Novofedorivka, close to the city of Saki. Nevertheless, I believe that even these preparations and the enemy's attempts to preserve their equipment don't always work out the way the Russians expect. Basically, I think the tactic of 1,000 small cuts will continue to be implemented. The destruction of the enemy's air defense systems gives us certain opportunities, allowing us to use those very drones on a larger scale, which ultimately destroy enemy military targets as well as military infrastructure. And again, I repeat over and over, what happened once will definitely happen again. Over the past week, the Feodosia oil depot was hit twice. Several tanks are still burning there, and a few more have survived, but I think it's only a matter of time before they're destroyed as well, just like everything else. Given that at least 2/3 of the regions in the Russian Federation are experiencing problems with the shortage of popular gasoline brands, I think attacks on oil storage facilities and refineries are exactly the kind of case that allows us, gradually but surely, to deplete the offensive capabilities of the Russian occupiers.
It is also known that there is currently a decline in the number of volunteers in Russia who are willing to go to war against Ukraine. This only indicates that the Kremlin's method of boosting army recruitment through high financial incentives has lost its effectiveness. At least, that's what the Institute for the Study of War is reporting. According to analysts, the number of people signing contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense has stopped growing, even in regions where the highest financial payments are offered. We think is the reason for this.
I believe there are 2 reasons. First, the capacity of the Russian budget is gradually being depleted, including the military sector. That's the first reason. And secondly, we have to understand that it's quite possible the adversary is literally motivating Russian citizens to fight for nothing more than a bowl of soup. After all, the decrease in the overall level of financial security for Russians, among others, will push them to make certain compromises, including agreeing to go fight for mere pennies, especially since the option of financial incentives isn't working properly anymore. The adversary is still able, for now, to compensate for their monthly losses at a rate of 30 to 35,000. Yes, of course, this process is gradually running out of steam. There are fewer and fewer willing participants, because people realize that it's basically a one-way ticket and the most they can do. These kinds of volunteers is to provide financial stability for their families. But do these mechanisms always work? No, not always. Very often, a huge number of bodies of Russian servicemen are simply abandoned and left to rot in Ukrainian fields without evacuation, and as a result, the option of receiving certain financial compensations doesn't work. No body, no case. That's why, of course, the Russians aren't just randomly starting to adapt their mobilization system to a certain extent to the current conditions and realities. I mean the organization of conscription for compulsory military service year-round, which will allow them to significantly increase the number of conscripts. And in addition, they're carrying out certain repressive measures aimed at literally forcing a certain category of Russian citizens into the ranks of the Russian military infrastructure.
Subscribe to The Gaze and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.